America slow danced to their voices, while some of them were quietly breaking behind the spotlight. They sold us love, desire, and freedom, but offstage their own hearts came with rules. Hidden relationships, dangerous rumors, lives edited for survival. These are the dark stories behind black music legends who paid a brutal price for being themselves. Number 1. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston had the voice America trusted. She could turn one note into a prayer and one love song into a memory millions carried for life. Behind the perfect gowns, Grammy nights, and dazzling smile, however, was a private story she never publicly told. The woman celebrated as a symbol of love was also protecting a love the world might not have accepted. In 1980, teenage Whitney met Robin Crawford while they were working at a summer community center in New Jersey. Their friendship quickly became intimate. Crawford later revealed that their relationship was physical in those early years. But as Whitney moved closer to superstardom and signed with Arista Records, she ended that part of their relationship, telling Crawford that if people discovered it, they could use it against them. Robin stayed beside her for years as a trusted friend and professional partner, while Whitney became one of the biggest stars on earth. Rumors followed them, but Whitney never publicly confirmed what had happened between them. That is what makes the story so painful. She could stand before millions and sing about unconditional love, yet one of the most intimate chapters of her own life had to remain unnamed. Then came February 11, 2012. Whitney was found dead in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton at only 48. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use contributing. 7 years later, Crawford finally told their story. The darkest truth was not who Whitney loved. It was that becoming Whitney Houston may have required parts of Whitney herself to disappear. Number 2. Little Richard. Before America knew what rock and roll was supposed to look like, Little Richard kicked down the door in makeup, glitter, and a towering pompadour. Then came Tutti Frutti in 1955, followed by Long Tall Sally and Good Golly, Miss Molly. His screaming vocals and pounding piano helped rewrite American music, inspiring everyone from the Beatles to generations of performers who copied the freedom he seemed to own on stage. But the man behind that explosion lived inside a brutal contradiction. Richard Penniman grew up in a deeply religious world, while his sexuality and flamboyant identity repeatedly pulled him in another direction. Over the years, he described himself in radically different ways. In 1995, he said he had been gay all his life. In 2012, he called himself omnisexual. Yet in 2017, he publicly condemned homosexuality through the language of his Christian faith. That conflict followed him like a shadow. One moment he could be the fearless man who shattered rules of masculinity in front of screaming crowds. The next, he could retreat toward religion and reject the very desires he had previously acknowledged. His life was not a simple secret waiting to be exposed. It was a lifelong battle between the person who felt free under stage lights and the person who feared what that freedom might mean when the music stopped. Little Richard died on May 9, 2020, at 87 after battling bone cancer. By then, the world finally understood how much of modern music carried his fingerprints. But his darkest story was never about scandal. It was about a man who taught millions to break the rules while spending decades fighting himself. The stage gave Little Richard permission to become everything. His private world never made that freedom so simple. Number 3. Luther Vandross. Millions of Americans fell in love to Luther Vandross. But the man who became the king of romance kept his own love life almost completely off limits. His voice made weddings feel sacred and heartbreak feel beautiful. Yet while fans searched his songs for clues about who held his heart, Luther guarded that answer with a silence that lasted his entire career. Long before Never Too Much made him a star in 1981, Luther had already sung with David Bowie and worked behind some of music's biggest names. Then came Here and Now, Any Love, and eventually Dance with My Father. 8 Grammys followed. 11 platinum albums followed. Fame gave Luther almost everything a singer could dream of, except the freedom to stop protecting his private world. When questioned about his sexuality, Luther refused to give the public an answer. Years after his close friend Patti LaBelle said they had talked about it. According to her, he worried about hurting his mother and feared how his enormous female fan base might react. In an industry selling him as the ultimate romantic man, telling the truth could have changed everything. Then his body betrayed him. A devastating stroke in 2003 ended his ability to perform as before, and Luther died in 2005 at only 54. The tragedy was bigger than the secret itself. He spent decades giving strangers permission to love loudly while keeping his own heart protected. America knew every note Luther sang. The part it never truly knew was Luther. Number 4. Billy Preston. The Beatles were falling apart when a 22-year-old keyboard player walked into their studio and changed the temperature of the room. Billy Preston brought gospel fire to the troubled Get Back sessions, played their legendary rooftop concert, and became the only outside musician ever credited alongside them on a single Get Back. Soon, people were calling him the fifth Beatle. What audiences saw was pure joy. What they could not see was the weight Billy carried home. A recent documentary built from rare footage and studio outtakes says Preston privately struggled with his sexuality and childhood sexual abuse subjects, known to very few people around him. For a deeply religious black musician rising through the 1960s and 1970s, those conflicts were not simply personal. They could threaten the identity his career depended on. Success only made this contrast sharper. Billy scored major solo hits, worked with the Rolling Stones, Ray Charles, and Aretha Franklin, and could make a keyboard sound like freedom itself. Yet fame never erased the private battles. Behind the grin, the outrageous talent, and the famous friendships was a man whose darkest wounds rarely appeared in the music magazines. By 2005, serious health problems had left Preston in a coma. He never regained consciousness and died on June 6, 2006, at 59, after complications involving kidney failure. The cruel irony is hard to miss. Billy helped bring life back into one of the most famous bands in history, while parts of his own life remained hidden. His hands sounded free. The man behind them was carrying a much heavier story. Number 5. Teddy Pendergrass. Women packed theaters just to hear Teddy Pendergrass breathe into a microphone. By the late 1970s, his deep voice, muscular image, and ladies-only concerts had turned him into one of R&B's most dangerous sex symbols. Close the door, turn off the lights, and love. TKO made desire sound almost physical. 5 consecutive platinum albums proved Teddy was not simply famous. He was becoming unstoppable. Then one night destroyed the image. America thought it knew. On March 18, 1982, Teddy's Rolls-Royce crashed into trees in Philadelphia. His passenger was Tanika Watson, a transgender nightclub performer. Teddy survived, but suffered a devastating spinal cord injury that left him paralyzed. Almost instantly, the accident became more than a tragedy. Rumors about his private life exploded because of who had been sitting beside him. That reaction exposed something darker than gossip. A man fighting to understand whether he would ever move normally again was also watching strangers dissect his masculinity. Teddy never confirmed the sexual rumors surrounding the crash. Yet the whispers followed him, revealing how quickly fame could turn someone's worst night into public spectacle. 3 years later, Teddy rolled onto the Live Aid stage in Philadelphia. He could no longer command the stage with his body, but when he began to sing, the crowd rose for him. He lived until 2010, dying at 59 after colon cancer. Teddy's darkest chapter was not a secret romance. It was surviving the night that took away his body, challenged his public identity, and still refusing to let it take his voice. Number 6. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye could make desire sound almost holy. From I Heard It Through the Grapevine to Let's Get It On, What's Going On, and Sexual Healing. He became Motown's most seductive contradiction. America saw silk suits, bedroom anthems, and effortless cool. Behind that image lived a man shaped by fear, religion, addiction, and a home he could never fully escape. His childhood had been ruled by a strict minister father who used physical and psychological punishment. Fame did not erase those wounds. By the early 1980s, Marvin was battling depression, cocaine abuse, debt, and paranoia. Then sexual healing brought him roaring back. In 1983, he won his first Grammys, seemingly proving the darkness had finally lost. It had not. Decades later, Quincy Jones triggered another mystery by claiming Marvin had slept with Marlon Brando. Marvin's son publicly rejected the allegation as completely false. Gaye himself never publicly confirmed a relationship with a man. That distinction matters. The real story is darker than an unproven rumor. Marvin spent his life caught between desire, faith, public fantasy, and private chaos. On April 1st, 1984, one day before his 45th birthday, an argument inside his parents' Los Angeles home turned violent. His own father shot and killed him. The man who asked America what's going on died inside the family conflict that had haunted him since childhood. Marvin sold passion to the world. At home, love had always come with danger. Number 7. Sylvester. Disco had plenty of stars. Sylvester looked like someone sent back from the future. Born in Watts in 1940, he carried gospel in his voice, glamour in his clothes, and absolutely no interest in behaving the way America expected a black man to behave. By the time he reached San Francisco and joined the outrageous Coquettes, Sylvester was not asking permission to be different. He was building a world where different could be beautiful. Then You Make Me Feel Mighty Real hit the dance floor in 1978. That soaring falsetto turned clubs into churches and Sylvester into the queen of disco. He appeared in sequins, fur makeup, and feminine silhouettes without shrinking himself for television. Unlike many artists of his era, the secret was not that Sylvester was gay. People knew. The real shock was how little he tried to hide it. But visibility came with a price. When disco faded and the AIDS crisis began, devastating queer communities, the glitter around Sylvester entered a much darker world. He kept recording and performing as friends and fellow artists disappeared around him. In June 1988, already gravely ill, he appeared at San Francisco Pride in a wheelchair and publicly acknowledged that he had AIDS. 6 months later, on December 16, 1988, Sylvester died at only 41. His story carries a different kind of heartbreak. He did what so many others were terrified to do. He showed the world who he was. And the dark truth is that courage did not protect him from prejudice, illness, or loss. Sylvester made millions feel free for a few minutes on the dance floor. He paid for that freedom with a life lived completely exposed. Number 8. Phyllis Hyman. At 6'1", Phyllis Hyman could walk onto a stage and make the entire room look smaller. Her smoky contralto turned You Know How to Love Me into an R&B classic, while Broadway's Sophisticated Ladies earned her a Tony nomination in 1981. She looked regal, fearless, almost untouchable. But some of her most haunting songs were describing a loneliness fame could not cure. Her records began sounding almost too personal. Living All Alone carried the ache of someone surrounded by applause, but starving for connection. Hyman struggled with bipolar disorder, depression, and addiction as her career moved through painful highs and lows. TV One later described those songs as a possible window into battles she was fighting away from the stage. Years after her death, an authorized biography created with cooperation from her estate discussed relationships with men and one woman. Hyman herself never publicly defined her sexuality, making the rumors surrounding her far less important than the silence and isolation documented throughout her life. The darker story was how much pain could exist inside someone who appeared so powerful. Hours before she was scheduled to perform at Harlem's Apollo Theater on June 30, 1995, Phyllis was found in her Manhattan apartment after taking her own life. She was only 45. The cruelest detail came later. An album titled I Refuse to Be Lonely was released after her death. For fans, the title no longer sounded like a song. It sounded like a fight she had been losing in private. Number 9. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway could make pain sound beautiful enough to play twice. Raised in St. Louis by his gospel-singing grandmother, he entered Howard University on a music scholarship before becoming one of soul's most gifted voices. A Song for You, This Christmas, and his breathtaking duets with Roberta Flack made him sound almost invincible. In 1973, Where Is the Love earned them a Grammy. Success, however, was happening beside a private battle few fans understood. Hathaway suffered severe depression and was eventually diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. There were periods when treatment helped, followed by frightening setbacks. The same musician who could arrange a song with astonishing precision was struggling against a mind that could suddenly turn the world around him into something terrifying. Years later, rumors would attach themselves to Hathaway's private life, including speculation about his sexuality. No reliable evidence confirms those claims. The documented truth is already darker. He was a husband, a father, and a musical genius fighting an illness that fame, applause, and extraordinary talent could not silence. On January 13, 1979, Hathaway fell from the Essex House Hotel in New York and died at only 33. Police suspected suicide, and no note was found. His death left Roberta Flack, his family, and soul music with an absence that never truly closed. Donny once sang, "Someday we'll all be free." After his death, those words stopped sounding like hope alone. They sounded like a man reaching for peace he could not always find. Number 10. Arthur Conley. At 21, Arthur Conley had the kind of breakthrough most singers spend a lifetime chasing. With mentor Otis Redding, he transformed a Sam Cooke idea into sweet soul music, a blazing 1967 anthem that climbed to number 2 on both the pop and R&B charts. Suddenly, this gospel-raised kid from Georgia looked like soul music's next great star. Then Redding died in a plane crash that same year, and the future Arthur had imagined began slipping away. Years later, his story took a turn almost no fan saw coming. Conley left America, moving through England and Belgium before settling in the Netherlands. There he became Lee Roberts. Rock historian Ed Ward later reported that Conley was gay and had spent his American career hiding it. In Holland, the secret that could have threatened a black soul singer's image suddenly mattered far less. Arthur Conley had found something fame never gave him: room to exist without explanation. The cruel part is what freedom cost. The man behind one of soul's loudest celebrations quietly disappeared from the American spotlight. Under his new name, he performed, built music businesses, and lived far from the machine that once promised him stardom. Arthur died of intestinal cancer in Ruurlo on November 17, 2003, at 57. America remembered the hit. Europe gave the man behind it somewhere to breathe. Number 11. Jermaine Stewart. One song turned Jermaine Stewart into the man every radio station seemed to know. We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1986, wrapped in bright fashion, sharp dancing, and a message that felt almost rebellious during the age of MTV. But Jermaine had already spent years chasing that moment, appearing on Soul Train and singing behind acts including Shalimar and Boy George before finally stepping into his own spotlight. What happened after the hit was far less glamorous. The follow-up success never reached the same height, and by the early 1990s, Jermaine's American career was fading. Rumors about his sexuality circulated, but he never publicly defined himself in the way later generations might expect. And this was the darkest possible era for such speculation. AIDS fear was everywhere, gay men were being stigmatized, and a black male pop star could watch one rumor become more powerful than his music. Behind closed doors, Jermaine's health was collapsing. He continued recording while battling AIDS, working on music that would never become the comeback he hoped for. On March 17, 1997, he died in Homewood, Illinois, at only 39 from AIDS-related complications. The cruel irony still lingers. Jermaine became famous singing that intimacy did not require exposure. In the end, he lived during a time when exposure itself could cost an artist everything. Number 12. Johnny Mathis. For decades, Johnny Mathis was the voice people put on when they wanted romance without complications. Chances Are Misty and It's Not For Me to Say turned him into one of America's most enduring crooners. His polished suits, gentle smile, and velvet voice sold an image of perfect romance. But the man singing those songs knew exactly how dangerous one honest sentence could become. That sentence arrived in 1982. During an interview with Us magazine, Mathis spoke about being gay and described it as a life he had grown accustomed to. The reaction was vicious. According to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, death threats followed the article. Mathis pulled back from discussing his sexuality and remained largely silent about it for decades. Imagine the contradiction. Millions wanted him to soundtrack their love stories, while revealing his own truth could make strangers threaten his life. Mathis did not need a scandal to understand the rules. Survival meant controlling what the public was allowed to know. Only much later in 2017 did he openly confirm that he was gay and speak more freely about the experience. Johnny did not take that truth to the grave. He outlived the silence. In 2025, at 89, he retired from live performance because of age and accelerating memory issues after nearly 7 decades on stage. The dark truth is what happened between 1982 and that later freedom. America adored his voice for singing about love, while for years telling the truth about his own love came with a threat attached. Number 13, Nona Hendryx. Long before pop stars called themselves fearless, Nona Hendryx was descending onto stages in silver costumes, feathers, and futuristic armor. With Patti LaBelle and Sarah Dash, she turned LaBelle into something black music had rarely seen before. Then, Lady Marmalade exploded in 1974, reached #1, and made the trio international stars. Their sound was provocative. Their image looked like tomorrow. Nona, however, was living ahead of more than music. She was a bisexual black woman working inside an industry that already struggled to market her as a rock artist. After LaBelle broke apart in 1976, her solo debut arrived the next year, but record executives seemed unsure what to do with a black woman mixing soul, hard rock, funk, sexuality, and experimentation. The freedom audiences admired on stage could become a liability inside a record company. Her private life was never as simple as the rumors made it sound. Hendryx later lived far more openly and righter. Pitchfork identified her longtime manager, Vicky Wickham, as her partner in both work and love. That changes the dark truth of her story. Nona was not a woman who carried her identity to the grave. She was someone who survived long enough to stop letting an industry define how much of herself could be visible. And that may be the most powerful ending of all. Nona did not disappear. She kept creating, performing, and pushing forward. While younger queer black artists entered doors her generation had barely been allowed to touch. The world once struggled to understand where she fit. Nona Hendryx answered by refusing to fit anywhere at all. Number 14. Billy Paul. One forbidden affair made Billy Paul famous. In 1972, Me and Mrs. Jones turned a secret meeting between two lovers into one of the smoothest confessions ever recorded. The song hit #1, sold millions, and earned Paul a Grammy. Suddenly, the jazz singer from North Philadelphia was the voice of hidden desire. America knew every detail of the affair in his song. Almost nothing was known about the man singing it. Instead of repeating the formula, Billy took a risk. His follow-up, Am I Black Enough for You, traded bedroom romance for black pride and political fire. Radio resisted it. Mainstream momentum collapsed, and the superstar moment began slipping away almost as quickly as it arrived. The cruel twist was striking. When Billy sang about forbidden love, America listened. When he confronted race and identity, much of that audience disappeared. For decades, Paul remained intensely associated with Mrs. Jones, while his real private life stayed far less sensational than the rumors later attached to him. He was married to Blanche Williams for decades, and reliable sources do not establish the same-sex claims repeated in some retellings. Billy died from pancreatic cancer on April 24, 2016, at 81. His dark truth was not a proven secret lover. It was watching one fictional secret define him, while the bolder parts of his real voice were pushed into the shadows. Number 15. Keith Barrow. Keith Barrow was supposed to have more time. Born in Chicago in 1954, the son of legendary civil rights activist Reverend Willie Barrow, grew up singing gospel before sliding into soul and disco. You Know You Want to Be Loved reached the R&B top 30 in 1978, while Turn Me Up became a club favorite. At 29, Keith still looked like an artist standing at the beginning of something bigger. His most important confession happened away from the stage. Keith came out to his mother, and instead of rejecting him, Willie Barrow eventually carried that experience into the gay rights movement. Then illness entered the story. After becoming sick while touring, Keith was later diagnosed with AIDS. At a time when fear and stigma surrounded the disease, he told his mother not to hide what was happening to him. On October 22, 1983, Keith died from AIDS-related complications in Chicago. He was only 29, one of the early Black performers lost during the emerging AIDS crisis. His career ended before the world could discover how far his voice might travel. But his final impact reached beyond music. His mother turned grief into activism, speaking publicly about AIDS and gay rights. Keith lost his future, but his truth helped give someone else the courage to fight.